The roar of tens of thousands of voices, the clash of steel, the smell of blood and sand, for centuries, this was the heart of Rome. The Colosseum was the grand stage for an empire's power, a place where life and death were traded for applause. We've all seen the images and marveled at the sheer scale of it. For an audience of at least 50,000 Romans, from the emperor in his gilded box to the commoners in the highest seats, this was the ultimate show. But what happened after the last gladiator fell, when the crowds vanished into the Roman night? That's when a different kind of spectacle began. In hidden chambers, far from the public eye, a more sinister system took over. This wasn't a performance for the masses. It was a cold, calculated machine of terror, operating in the darkness. What if the real games of Rome weren't played on the arena floor, but in the labyrinthine corridors buried just beneath it? This is the story of what happened when the crowds went home. When you look at the Colosseum today, you see the stands, the arches, the monumental scale. But beneath the now missing arena floor lies a vast, two-level subterranean network, the hypogeum. From the Greek for underground, this area wasn't even part of the original design. It was an upgrade, an innovation in terror ordered by the Emperor Domitian to make the games more spectacular and more efficient. For centuries, this underground world was largely buried and its intricate workings were lost to time, but modern archaeology has brought its secrets back to light. For the first time, we can walk the same corridors where gladiators and condemned prisoners waited in darkness, and where wild animals, captured from the farthest corners of the empire, were caged. Imagine the scene. The thunderous applause from above is just a muffled, terrifying boom. The air is thick with the stench of sweat, fear, and animal waste. The only light comes from flickering torches, casting long, dancing shadows. This wasn't a place of honor or glory. It was a factory of death. Archaeologists have uncovered the complex machinery that made it all possible, a series of wooden elevators and pulleys, powered by hundreds of slaves, designed to hoist caged animals, scenery, and fighters up to the arena. This complex system featured dozens of vertical shafts and trapdoors. Some sources count 36, others as many as 60, allowing for shocking and dramatic entrances. A hunter on the sand would never know where the next lion might appear, or if one would suddenly become three. The noise down here would have been a hellish symphony, the groaning of machinery, the shouts of stagehands, the growls of starved leopards, and the silent prayers of the men about to die. Recent excavations of the Colosseum's drainage systems found leftovers from the spectators' lives above, seeds of figs, grapes, and cherries they snacked on. But the hypogeum tells a different story. Its very design is one of systematic terror. It was a labyrinth where human beings and animals were reduced to props, waiting in claustrophobic holding pens to be lifted into the light and slaughtered. This was the engine room of the games, a place of profound psychological torment before a single drop of blood was even spilled. The midday slot of the Roman Games, a time when many wealthier patrons might leave for lunch, was reserved for a particularly grotesque show, the Damnatio. This was the public execution of criminals, but in Rome, a simple execution was never enough. It had to be a performance. And the most creative of these were the fatal charades, where condemned prisoners were forced to reenact famous myths, with a very real and gruesome end. This wasn't some secret ritual, it was a public display of the state's ultimate power, the power to turn a person into a story, and a story into a method of death. The Roman writer Martial, who documented the Colosseum's opening games, described these fatal performances in chilling detail. A criminal could be cast as the mythical figure Icarus, given useless wings, and then dropped from a height to his death. Another might be forced to play Hercules, dressed in a tunic soaked in a flammable substance, and burned alive on a pyre, mirroring the hero's mythical end. Martial even attests that audiences witnessed a reenactment of the myth of Pasiphae, who legend says coupled with a bull. In the Colosseum's version, a condemned woman was forced into a similar fate, a horrifying spectacle designed to blur the line between myth and reality. These weren't just executions, they were a form of psychological warfare. By casting criminals as figures from mythology, the state wasn't just killing a person, it was making a powerful statement. The criminal's crime was equated with the hubris of a mythological character, and their death became a preordained, inescapable fate. For the person condemned, the horror is almost unimaginable. You aren't just sentenced to die, you are forced to become a character in a play where the final act is your own brutal, public demise. The process served to completely dehumanize the victim, stripping them of their identity and turning their final moments into bloody theater. It reinforced the idea that the condemned were no longer truly human, but simply props in a story controlled by the emperor. These mythological executions reveal a side of Rome that is far more disturbing than simple gladiatorial combat, showing a society so obsessed with spectacle that it turned its most sacred stories into scripts for human sacrifice. Of all the sentences a Roman court could hand down, perhaps the most feared was damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This was more than just a death sentence, it was the ultimate act of dehumanization. Reserved for the worst criminals, runaway slaves, and enemies of the state, it was a legal declaration that you were no longer a member of the human race. Your life was forfeit, and your body was just food for wild animals, all for the entertainment of the Roman people. The logistics were staggering. The Roman Empire became a vast hunting ground. Bears were shipped from Scotland, lions and leopards from North Africa, crocodiles from Egypt, and on rare occasions, tigers, an incredibly expensive import from the far reaches of Asia. The capture and transport of these animals was a massive industry, sometimes requiring entire military units. Once in the hypogeum, these animals were systematically mistreated to ensure maximum ferocity. They were starved, beaten, and kept in darkness to make them aggressive. The spectacle itself could take several forms. Sometimes, the condemned were tied to stakes, helpless. In other versions, they might be given a crude weapon to put up a futile fight, prolonging the show. The poet Martial describes a bandit named Laureolus, who was crucified in the arena before being attacked and eaten by a bear, his punishment staged to resemble the myth of Prometheus. The psychological impact of this sentence began long before the victim entered the arena. To know your fate was to be torn apart by animals in front of a cheering crowd was a unique form of terror. There are accounts of prisoners committing suicide to avoid this fate, with one group of German prisoners reportedly strangling each other to death. Another choked himself by swallowing the communal toilet sponge. For the audience, Damnatio ad bestias was a powerful symbol of Roman order conquering the chaos of nature. By breaking the law, the criminal had forfeited their right to Roman protection and was symbolically thrown back into the savage wilderness, to be consumed by it. It was a visceral reminder of the state's power. The screams of the dying were lost in the roar of a crowd that saw not a human being, but an entertaining reassertion of Roman dominance. It's one thing to read about these events, but it's another to truly comprehend the systematic nature of this cruelty. The sheer scale of it forces us to reconsider what we think we know about Roman civilization. If you're finding this exploration into the dark side of Rome compelling, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It helps us continue to dig into these hidden histories and bring them to light. At the center of this world of state-sanctioned violence stood the gladiator. Theirs was one of the great paradoxes of Roman society. Legally, they were at the absolute bottom, slaves, condemned criminals, or prisoners of war. They were classified as infames, or infamous ones, with no civil rights. And yet, in the eyes of the public, the best gladiators were superstars. They were icons of strength, bravery, and the Roman martial ideal. This paradox created a bizarre social dynamic. While officially despised, gladiators were also objects of intense public fascination and desire. Their images appeared on mosaics, pottery, and graffiti across the empire. Emperors like Commodus even entered the arena themselves, seeking to capture some of the gladiators' aura of masculine power, though their bouts were usually staged for safety. This obsession gave rise to a strange and macabre market. Everything associated with a famous gladiator took on a special value. The sweat scraped from a victorious fighter's body with a tool called a strigil was collected and sold. While some modern claims that it was used as a luxury face cream are not well supported by ancient sources, it was believed to hold a certain power. Even more sought after was their blood. The blood of a fallen gladiator was thought to be a cure for epilepsy and impotence. It was believed that by drinking the blood, one could absorb the fighter's vitality. Brides would even part their hair on their wedding day with a spearhead that had been dipped in a gladiator's blood, believing it would bring fertility and a happy marriage. This commodification of human suffering reveals the deep contradictions in Roman society. A gladiator was simultaneously a non-person and a celebrity, a disposable slave and a revered hero. Their body was both a tool for entertainment and a collection of valuable ingredients. The system didn't just sell death as a show, it packaged and sold the very essence of its victims, their sweat, their blood, their life force, to a public that both scorned and idolized them. This was the ultimate objectification, turning every part of a human being into a product to be consumed. The games weren't just a chaotic bloodbath, they were a business. The spectacle of the Colosseum was the end product of a vast and coldly efficient machine that involved immense planning, financial investment, and a complex hierarchy of specialized roles. This was the bureaucracy of brutality, a system that managed death on an industrial scale. At the top was the editor, the sponsor of the games, often the emperor or a wealthy magistrate looking for political favor. For them, the games were a public relations tool, a way to show off their wealth and keep the people happy. The cost was astronomical, covering not just the gladiators but also the animals, the elaborate sets, the musicians, and the massive staff needed to run the place. The gladiators themselves were owned and managed by a lanista, the head of a gladiatorial school, or ludus. A lanista had a social status similar to that of a pimp, they profited from trafficking human bodies, yet they were essential to the system. Inside the ludus, life was brutal discipline and relentless training. Gladiators swore an oath to endure to be burned, to be bound, to be beaten, and to be killed by the sword. They were property. Beneath these figures was an army of functionaries. There were animal handlers, armorers, the stagehands operating the lifts in the hypogeum, and even medical staff. And of course, undertakers. At the end of a fight, an attendant dressed as Charon, the mythical ferryman of the dead, would enter to confirm a gladiator was truly dead. The bodies were then dragged through the gate of death, taken to the spoliarium, and stripped of their armor and weapons before disposal. This entire process was managed with the detached efficiency of a modern corporation. Records were kept, costs were calculated, and logistics were meticulously planned. The system that brought a lion from Africa to a cage in the hypogeum, and a prisoner from a German forest to the sands of the arena, was a testament to Roman organizational genius. But it was a genius applied to an end of unimaginable cruelty. The bureaucracy sanitized the violence, turning people into assets and death into a line item on a ledger. This cold, administrative approach is, in many ways, more chilling than the combat itself. It shows a society that had not just accepted violence, but had institutionalized it, perfected it, and turned it into a formal, repeatable process. This system of organized brutality was hidden in plain sight, accepted as a normal part of Roman life. It makes you wonder what other truths are buried beneath the surface of history. We create these videos to challenge the popular narratives and explore the often uncomfortable realities of the past.